Are you ready to stop stress, anxiety, and low self-esteem from running your life? Join award-winning author Dr. Friedemann Schaub from Empowerment Radio as he addresses some of the most prevailing challenges in our day-to-day lives. Find out how you can use the power of your mind to overcome self-sabotaging patterns and build a solid foundation of confidence and self-respect. Learn cutting-edge tools and approach every day with great ease, joy, and purpose. This is the time to empower yourself. Now, here's your host, Dr. Friedemann Schaub.
Welcome to Empowerment Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Friedemann. Now, in the last episode of Empowerment Radio, I talked about being your best self, being that gift that keeps on giving for the holidays. Now, if you have missed that show, you can always go to the archive section or the YouTube channel, Dr. Friedemann Schaub, and listen and watch all the shows that have been aired on Empowerment Radio and other topics, guided meditations. There are also webinars and so on. Lots to spend time with and enjoy. Now, the topic of this show is also a challenge that often people, especially during the holiday, feel the most intensely, even though it's something that can, throughout the year, keep you awake at night. Now, have you ever felt that you at 2 o'clock in the morning wake up, heart pounding, you barely can breathe, you have a full-blown anxiety attack, and all you're thinking of is why? Why is it that no one loves me? Why is it that somehow I haven't found that special someone? What's wrong with me? Am I just not lovable? Well, this form of loneliness and this fear of being unlovable is a little bit like an epidemic in our society. And it's a paradox, isn't it, that we are living more and more closely together, especially in big cities, that we have more and more virtual friends and are more and more connected with each other through social media, but at the same time, we are feeling more and more isolated and more alone. So what I would like to address today with my very special guest is how to address that lack of self-love. Now, I often hear clients tell me that they come to me with, well, I'm anxious, I'm depressed, I feel insecure. And then at the end of our work together, they tell me that for the first time in their life, they have a sense of love and appreciation for themselves. So on some level, love for yourself is not just a luxury. It's not just something that feels good. And some people say, well, if you love yourself, only then you can find also someone who loves you. The question I want to also ask my guest. But I do believe that self-love is a necessity. It is something that really is a foundation of our existence. And it is certainly an amazing bridge from fear and anxiety into a whole new experience of life, a much more fulfilling and gratifying one. So I'm excited to talk about this topic with an expert, someone who has been also on the side of looking for love, and writes very openly in her book about her trials and her errors and the things that she has learned when she went through sleepless nights and has been struggling. I'm talking about Dr. Leonora Nieves. She is a behavioral scientist. She has been a personal development coach and a consultant on the OWN network, Oprah Winfrey Network, for quite some time. She works with clients across the country, providing tools to be healthier, happier, and more productive by shifting people's thoughts and behaviors that have blocked them from leading their fullest and most self-empowered lives. And she also has been the author of a fabulous book, which is called Love You, 12 Ways to Be Who You Love and Love Who You Are. Well, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Friedemann. Thank you for having me. That is quite an intro.
Well, I was reading through your book, and what really fascinates me about this book is how it starts out with just being completely open and vulnerable and really making the reader feel like, yep, have been there, know exactly what you're talking about. But I think you're on the other side. So tell me, why did you write this book in the first place? What got
For
you?
exactly that reason. You hit it on the head. It's because I had an immensely personal experience that as I got to work with more people and talk with more people, I realized was both immensely personal and incredibly universal, right? That we're all still struggling with these ideas of what our life is supposed to be like and how we can be both independent and somehow joined, right? And that's always a negotiation in many ways, and particularly when it comes to developing romantic relationships where we feel happy and validated and healthy and like we have a future and a foundation. And so we're always striving for that sense of connection, of intimacy, and it ain't easy to find. And so as a result, there's this disconnect constantly between what we're working towards, what we believe we want, what we believe we deserve, what we should have had already, and where we are. And so that disconnect, or what they call discrepancy, usually can lead to such a profound feeling of loneliness within people. And I think that's something that was really heartbreaking for me in my life, but also something that was so important for me to go through and get over. And I don't know that I knew at that time that there was a get over.
Hmm.
And so for me, if I could share that with people and give them some practical tools and techniques and sense of what it looks like at the get over, right, then I thought it was worth doing.
Now, what you said about the discrepancy, it sounds like what really bothers people is that they think they should be at this place. But who brings out the shoulds? Who are we trying to measure up to?
Yeah, I mean, I think comes from a multitude of influences, right? So we grow up and we're socialized into this idea of the family first, and be selfless, and being selfless requires others, right? So there's this neediness attached to the selflessness, right? So there's that piece of it, and we're constantly externally focused trying to figure out how to build those communities. And then we have the romanticization that happens constantly of this like fantasy of what the picket fence and the dog and the two kids and what the perfect life looks like at the end. So there's a lot of that in the way we're socialized, and of course our families play a role too, because they want what's best for us, and they have been socialized into the same idea, right? And if anybody can push those buttons and trigger up everything, it's your family. So
Absolutely.
there's a multitude of influences that sort of focuses us in the direction of you are not worthwhile, finished, successful, worth the success you're looking for if you don't have this piece of your life together.
Now, in this regard, of course, you can ask yourself, well, is it about following those ideas, even if the parents think it's the best for you? But at the
Yeah.
end, do they really know what's best for you? Or is it actually about maybe making up your own mind and living
Yeah.
up your own ideas? Now, do you have a feeling your loneliness or your anxiety around not being lovable got you more on a track of how can I speed up the process so that I'm finally doing what's expected
Sure.
from me? Or did you feel like, no, I'm going to go more into the self-reflection mode and figure more out who I am and what I want rather than falling into this cookie cutter?
I feel like I went probably back and forth between those two models, right? So there was a piece of me, particularly in my very early 20s, that kind of rebelled, as we tend to do at that age, against whatever the traditional idea that was being pushed on me was. And I was very clear that I was going to be independent and rewrite what my narrative would look like, and all this wonderful revolutionary energy, you know, that we go into our early 20s with. And then I think there was a part of me, as I became more acculturated and spent more time in the work world and had adult friends and became more interested in furthering my education, and sort of went into these models of social life that move you further into adulthood, or what adulthood is supposed to look like, right? And then I started to reincorporate some of those things that I had been socialized to believe were success. And part of that was a relationship where I felt loved and supported, but also that looked a particular way. And that's what I wanted. And I don't know that I knew at that time that I was settling, right? I had good partners. We weren't good together, but they weren't bad people. And so I felt like we just need to figure out how to make this work. And I hadn't spent any time by myself. And I didn't know myself as well as I do now. And I didn't love myself as much as I do now because I didn't know myself, right? And so that's the little twist. I think what ended up happening is when I had to be alone, and then I really started to do what you just said, which was search internally and reflect and shift and change and grow and ask questions and do all of the real hard internal work, then I started to know myself. And the more of me I learned about, the more of me I liked. And then when I started to really love being by myself, my relationships got better because I raised the standard of who you had to be to compete with me being with me. You know what I mean? So if you wanted to take me out on a Saturday, well, I was really good on a Saturday painting and drawing and reading and writing and watching reality TV. So you're going to have to be better than that now, you know? So that really made a difference, I think, in how I selected my partners and who I attracted and who even bothered with me, you know?
Well, when we come back from the break, I want to ask you two questions. And one question is, do we first have to be alone and find ourselves before we go into a relationship? Or can we find ourselves while we are in relationship? Because I can imagine a lot of people would say, oh my God, now I have to end this here so that I can find myself. And the other question is upbringing. How much do you feel that your upbringing, or in general upbringing, sets you up for feeling lovable, or maybe feeling that there is something wrong with you? When we come back, we will talk about that. Stay tuned. Right. Welcome back on Empowerment Radio. I'm here with my guest, Dr. Diana. Say it again.
Dinora Nieves.
Dinora Nieves, thank you very much.
That's all right. We have 4 segments.
Not a name that I very
Listen, if I can do Friedemann Schaub,
exactly.
You can do Dinora Nieves.
She's the author of the book Love You, and we talk about love, and especially the love for yourself. And before the break, I was asking her whether we have to, like in her case it was, be alone. Be okay with being alone through self-reflection, through finding out more who we are before we enter into this big adventure of being in relationship. Or what if we are older? What if we're in our 40s or 50s and feeling like, I still don't really know who I am, and maybe I have settled, but I don't really know what I'm going to do. Do I get a divorce? Do I look for my own apartment? Or can I do this work also on myself while being in a relationship? What would you say?
That's a great question. You know, I don't think that it requires you being alone, but I do think it requires a renegotiation of all of your norms. And sometimes that's easier to do when you're alone because you don't have people in the relationship with you that you have made agreements with to be a particular way, or that signed up because you were a particular way, right? And so a strong relationship, a healthy relationship, I think can absolutely tolerate, accept, nurture your self-improvement. Absolutely. I think it just has to be a relationship in which you can have those conversations with your partner, where you guys understand what the other person is experiencing, where you are able to ask that person for what you need and be explicit about and honest about what you're going through and how you need to change and why you need to change, right? And really have the space and room in the relationship to grow and renegotiate things in real time. And healthy relationships will allow you to do that, because we're always changing. We're always growing, right? And if we couldn't do that in a healthy relationship, we'd be alone forever. So I don't think it requires you being alone. I think the reason that for most people it happens when they're alone, or it's easier for them when they're alone, is because we don't tend to attract really healthy relationships if we haven't done the work already.
Right.
And so if you haven't done the work to attract a healthy relationship, then you probably won't have the space in the room in the relationship to continue to do the work. That's what I think gets people the most stuck. But if you're able to do that with your partner, it's a beautiful process.
Now, one thing I notice about my clients is that when they do work on themselves and change with also the outcome of loving themselves, there is actually a much greater chance that the relationship goes to the next level, almost like subconsciously. The partner picks that up, and often clients tell me, well, I'm not sure about, my husband or my wife, we're a little bit stuck in that. And once people overcome, and you may have noticed this too, once people overcome that idea that you're selfish when you are changing or working on yourself, but this is actually something that gives some new life to the relationship as well, I think everything also will positively affect your partner. And I have heard clients telling me, well, all of a sudden my partner starts jogging with me. Before he was a couch potato, or all of a sudden my wife loves also being vegetarian and we are making smoothies together. And so there are things that are surprising, and you, as you're seeing yourself in a new light, you also all of a sudden see your partner in a new light. And I think that's very exciting. And your book certainly can help people to get there. Now, I asked before about I'm often interested in the root causes of the lack of self-love, and they do have to do with our upbringing. Now, your upbringing from your book, I gather, was rather harmonious or loving, or did you have a lack of positive feedback from your family of origin?
No, the contrary. I had so much positive feedback. I didn't know what to do without it.
Now that's an interesting one.
Right? I had a great upbringing. Everybody has things, right? Blemishes in their family. So certainly no family is perfect. My parents loved me the best way that they could. But they, just like me, were socialized into a model of what we were supposed to be like. And, particularly as Latinos, my mother's a migrant, came over here from Puerto Rico, and they were working class. And so there were all these ideas that came along with all of those experiences, right? That you have to work hard to earn what you want, that if you don't earn it, you don't deserve it, that there's this constant need to achieve. We're very achievement based, right? So there's that piece of the migrant experience and the working class experience. They came from big families, right? My mother's one of 6, my father's one of 5. They all had, 5 or 6 kids. We were a big loving family, but a family in which if you wanted to be heard, you had to speak up, right? Or you could easily get lost. It was a family that was really communal, which has great pieces and not so great pieces. One of which is the family before the self. That we're constantly taught, particularly when we are in those big families. So there wasn't anything that they deliberately did to make me believe that I shouldn't put myself first. But culturally, it was implied, and then you add to that the piece of me being a woman in America, right? So we're already taught to be more domestic, more nurturing, more caretaking, more other focused. And then I'm a Latina, right? So there's that, what they call Marianismo, this idea that, the perfect woman is the Virgin Mary and all that comes with her, be pious, be domestic, be demure, So all of these different pieces came together to socialize me in such a way where I had an idea of a valuable human being as being focused externally on other people, somehow helping them, doing for them, creating a situation for them, making sure they're okay, whatever that looked like. And that if you focused internally too much, you were taking time to do something that was selfish. Right? And that's a real constraint that people have, a real limitation. As you mentioned before, it's one of the big pieces of getting people unstuck, is helping them acknowledge and understand and embrace the idea that they are worth their own time and energy, right? You are worth your own time and energy.
But it's interesting, this whole cultural difference that you grew up in, which, you know, on paper looks kind of lively and wonderful,
Yeah.
and meals together and big family.
Yeah.
But where did you see, especially for yourself, and I know there are quite a few Latina and Latino listeners, where did you see also the challenge with the relationship men and women that for you was something that you know, made it harder for you to pick the right partner?
Well, also, you know, I talk about this in the book as well. So I'm a bicultural Latina, born in the United States, right? And so I'm constantly juggling models of what it means to be a woman and what it means to be a man, right? And what pieces of that match in both cultures and where are they being challenged, right? And so, like in American culture, Latinas are the fiery, feisty, sassy, you know, whatever, right? And we've been sort of exoticized and otherized in that way. And then in Latino culture, there's this expectation, though, that you be the caretaker and the nurturer and maternal, right? And so we're constantly battling these different ideas of who we are. And by the way, not just us. Right? As I write about in the book, it just so happens this is what it looks like for Latinas. And I can write about what it looks like for Latinas because I'm a Latina, but it's certainly not a Latina problem, right? I have Italian friends that go through it, or, you know, Greek friends that have similar ideas, or I have a Nigerian friend that constantly battles some of that as well. So I think every culture has a prototype, right, or an archetype, if you will, of what their women are supposed to be and who their men are supposed to be and what that relationship is supposed to look like. And as we're moving through the world and modernity, we're constantly renegotiating that so that we can figure out what feels good for us and how do we keep some of the cultural values and not sort of be a traitor to our culture without embracing everything. Because, honey, I ain't cooking. I don't like it. You know what I mean? I don't enjoy it.
I'm sure your mother is very disappointed with you.
Yeah, although she cooks enough for everybody. So if there's a quota, you guys can stop. She got it. You know? So you have to just be able to balance that. And I think that's the work. The work is really striking a healthy balance in any area of your life.
But the work is also to have the courage to question values, question culture, question family. And that was probably, in your case, also at times challenging. So what would you recommend for people that feel like I really have to fight my family or have to be rebellious, and then they feel bad about it, and then they are caving in, and so they do this dance? How can we do graceful self-awareness and really also figuring out these values don't work for me without feeling like we have to get ostracized by our family?
Yeah. I love that term, Friedemann. I love that. Graceful self-awareness. I love that. Because that is a huge piece of what keeps people stuck, is the fear that if they change, they will outgrow the relationships they had. It's a big, big fear, right, that keeps us where we are.
Exactly.
Because there's a piece of us that acknowledges that they signed up for who we are right now. And so if we change, they may not, you know, and they may not come along. And that's so scary. And I think we all face that, particularly with our families of origin. I think the key is what I call sensitive accountability, which is to really be able to have conversations with people where you're like, I get where you're coming from. This is where I'm coming from. I'm not going to do that, and I love you anyway, right? Like, and not take everything as a hostile, offensive, domineering attempt to control who you are, because
Yeah.
that's usually not what it is. Everybody wants what's best for you. They're just convinced they know. That's the thing.
Exactly.
You know? So if you can take it more lightly, right? And rather than seeing it as an offensive invasion into your process of identity, right? Look at it as a helpful suggestion you could or could not take. That, I think, helps to really neutralize the energy around it. And
Well,
then,
absolutely. I just feel like what you said before is also so important, that we do have to, you were basically showered with love. And so you needed it. And
mhm,
when we do this journey of finding self-love, we have to also be willing for a while to not need that approval and that love, because we're
yeah,
doing exactly what's expected from us. And we have to become a little bit more self-sufficient. Now, after the break, I'm going to ask you more about this, and I'm going to ask you a topic
absolutely.
that so many, especially women, are struggling with, which is aging. How do
Mm,
we wrap our minds around
I wouldn't know anything
self-love
about that.
and aging? Stay tuned. We will be right back. Welcome back to Empowerment Radio. I'm talking with, and I'm not even trying to pronounce her name, but it's the author of Love You. You say it again.
No, we can do this together, Friedman. Denora Nieves.
See, somehow I don't get this word out. It's great.
Denora
Denora Nieves.
Nieves.
Thank
Look at
you.
that. Look at that.
My little German tongue. It's like, dancing the salsa with my hips. Some things are not really in my DNA, but I'm willing to learn.
I
So
love it. I love it.
thank you for being here. And we talked about before this importance, when you go onto this journey of self-love, to not be at the same time dependent of other
Mm,
people's approval, but
so
really
important.
learning to be more independent. How do you do this? What would you suggest is a good way for people to start seeking their own approval than other
Yeah,
people?
I think there are sort of more esoteric philosophical ways, and then I think there are your tangible concrete ways, right? So what we were talking about earlier, the spending more time with yourself and really inside of yourself, I think is one of the best ways, because the more that you start to love yourself and know yourself and connect with that inner voice and value that voice, right? The less the voices of other people tend to matter. So I think that that's a really important piece of the work. But there are real tangible, concrete, easy ways to start to even do that, right? Journaling is one of those things. Just being able to hear your voice, expressive writing. Look, sometimes I'll just sit to write and I'm like, oh crap, that's what I'm thinking, but because you don't really give yourself the space and the time to think about what you're thinking about and to really even hear that or see that. So just even expressive writing and journaling, gratitude listing, right? I spent an inordinate amount of my time when I'm not feeling good about myself, listing all of the things that are good about myself. Like if I look in the mirror and my stomach is a little more bloated than it was yesterday, my gratitude list is about all the organs in my stomach that are digesting food properly, because there are real wonderful things going on. And sometimes we tend to focus on the other things. And that's what keeps us empty and needing the fulfillment from other places and the validation from other places. But if we focus on all the good things inside of us and around us, then it really keeps us more full. And then we don't pull for the influence of others in quite the same way. So I think it's a mixture of both, of spending more time with yourself, being more comfortable with yourself, listening to yourself, but also shifting your focus deliberately so that you see all the good things about yourself constantly.
Now, you know how difficult it can be when you don't like yourself to see anything positive about yourself, and how challenging it is even to explain people that are more self-rejecting the
Mm-hmm.
concept of self-love. Now, let's say people start journaling and all they read, they don't like. They look in the
Mm-hmm.
mirror, they don't even like their inner organs. They
Mhm.
look at anything that they do,
Mhm.
everything feels bad. How do
Mhm.
you suggest people find any kind of gratitude for themselves? Where to start, with a little toe, or where would you begin?
Yeah, I love my little toe. Yeah. You know, part of it is being honest. I tell clients all the time, it doesn't help them or me for them to lie about what it is they're experiencing. So if they really can't find anything good about themselves, then that's what they should say and that's what they should write. That gives us a place to start, right? And then we're not going to go from I hate myself to I'm freaking fabulous in a 45-minute session. That's not going to happen. But can we bring this to a more neutral place? So what's the more neutral place? And then we work from the more neutral place to get us to the more loving place. So I think that's what I would recommend to people is let's not start with trying to transform the self-hate to self-love. Let's start with trying to take the self-judgment out of the self-hatred, right? Because that'll neutralize it a little bit. So if you look in the mirror and the first thing you see is, oh my God, my thighs are so fat, you're not going to jump from there to, oh my God, I love my fat thighs, right? That's not going to happen. But what you might be able to jump to is, wow, there are people who really struggle with mobility. There are people in the world who really struggle with mobility, who can't walk around. And if I didn't have these thighs, I would be one of them. And actually, my thighs are doing a good job keeping me mobile. So right now, I'm not going to worry about what they look like. That's a job for another day. Today, I'm going to be grateful that they keep me mobile, right? And what that means. And that'll take you to a more neutral place quickly. And
Hmm.
then in a later week, we can worry about how to teach you to look in the mirror and like them. But first, you got to stop hating them.
Well, that's a wonderful advice, and I find also sometimes it can be very helpful for just us to realize that we have a complete distortion in a distortion lens in front of our eyes, and so whatever we see in
Mm-hmm.
ourselves is probably to 80% wrong, especially when
Mm-hmm.
we are very self-judgmental and
Mm-hmm.
self-hating, and just realizing that often this lens has been not our idea in the first place. It
And
was
it serves a purpose,
right. It served
right?
a
It
purpose
serves a
to
massive
protect us,
purpose.
and
Well, and also, like, I'm a sociologist, so here's my bias, right? But we've been socialized to feel inadequate because it keeps us consumers. And that's real, right? Our economy lives off of our insecurities. Everything that we go out there and buy, or a large percentage of what we consume,
mm,
is to soothe some feeling of inadequacy. And so there is an enormous machine working to keep us feeling inadequate, right? So it's not a personal deficit, if you will. It's really just the way we've been socialized to think about ourselves. And we just have to remember that and then start to reprogram, right? And recondition out of that and into something that feels better.
but I have to say the unfairness of it all is that I completely agree with what you're saying, but I think women are made feel more inadequate than men. And that is just something that I find maybe also a little bit about not just the consumerism, but also the control
Yeah.
of women
Oh,
trying
yeah.
to just make sure that they are more focused on their thighs than maybe
Right.
making a huge change in the world, which is, thank God, happening as we speak, looking at the midterm elections.
Yes.
But back to the
Yes.
other societal pressure, which is fairly new, which is aging. Something 100 years people thought about, okay, aging means like, being the crown, being the wise one, being the one who has a lot to
Yep.
offer. Everyone listens to
It's an
that
accolade.
person.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now aging is an insult. Now aging is a demon that we have to avoid. Now aging is a multi-billion-dollar business where some little surgeons just love to make people look younger and unfortunately run away from themselves. What do you feel is your advice about aging, self-love, and how to, maybe it's time to rebel against this?
Absolutely. It's time to rebel against ideals. right? Because I think what happens is we get caught up in fantasy. And we do this with romantic relationship as well, which is part of what I talk about in the book. In our romantic relationships, how much of our time do we spend really getting to know our partner and build a partnership? And how much of it is about us scripting a fantasy and then casting the roles, right? And we do a lot of that. And even our role, right? The role of me is being played by somebody else, that I'm casting into that, right? Because we have these ideas and these ideals of what successful looks like, what happy looks like, what pretty looks like, what, all of these things we want to be, what they specifically will, what criteria specifically satisfies that adjective. And we get so wrapped up in that we're not willing to redefine it on the basis of how we feel inside, right? It's pretty how you look, or it's pretty how you feel. Is successful how you look to other people, or is successful how you feel? How much of it is about image and how much of it is about internal experience? That's a real question that we have to start asking ourselves. I'm 38 and I got all this like stuff going on. I got these new little wrinkles here. I'm starting to name them. Because one of my friends the other day said to me, "You gonna go dye your hair because I got some grays coming out?" I'm like, hell no. I know every single one of them. This one was the divorce. This one was the doctorate. I got some coming out right now that I'm excited to talk about later, right? Like, there is a piece of us that is getting better with age. There's a piece of us that is really getting wiser, getting more brilliant. And to erase the evidence of that is to diminish the quality of it, right? And the importance of it. And I think that's unfortunate. And, people have the right to do whatever they want to feel good, but be careful that you're not feeling good on the basis of what you think you are making other people believe about you, as opposed to what you really believe about yourself.
Well, which is exactly what we talked about, this independence of other people's approval and just really being more self-reliant. And I know it's difficult, and it's something that I think a lot of people are struggling with. This idea that once you're hitting 50, you become invisible is maybe in some ways a reality if you're seeing as such, but it makes you also act invisible. It makes you quiet and not speak up. And that is something that also is you buying into it. And yes, I know for men, it's always easier to talk about this because men are in general thought of not as struggling so much with aging, which isn't true at all. I have a lot of people that write me, and that's a shocking part of it, in their 20s, male and female, that are already now afraid of aging. So this is something we really have to address, because I love what you said about the image. It is about the dependency on the image, and it has a lot to do with that, what social media is putting into the world as this is how it's supposed to look like: sunset, drinking some Chardonnay and having a wonderful laugh. That is what my life every day looks like.
Right.
When you talk about, I have actually quite a few clients that have wonderful Instagram addresses and wonderful pictures, and then somehow we talk about exactly that day, and it's a complete different experience.
Right.
It's just that picture that is portraying the fantasy. So
and the idea that, because this is the thing too, the idea that what you see about people is all they are, right? Because I have a great Facebook timeline because I don't post what time I woke up. I don't post that. You didn't see that I was writing until 4 a.m. because I wouldn't post that. And it never dawns on me that people would think that everything I post is a representation of my life. I post videos of puppies. I don't even have a puppy. You know what I mean? Right? It's because you post sometimes on social media the things that bring you joy, give you a smile. That's what I sometimes will turn to my phone for. So we also have to get out of this idea that if we see something that looks perfect, we really believe it is. We more often than not are only seeing 10 to 20% of a person at any given moment in a conversation, at a stoplight, in a supermarket, on a social media post, we are not seeing the full story of who people are. And if we remember that, we won't be as easily manipulated the way that the economy needs us to be to continue, feeding it. And we also won't get so frustrated judging ourselves against some idea of perfect that isn't true.
And we don't compare as much because
Right.
it's a false comparison. But don't you feel like there is an importance also, and that's a question that I wanted to ask you about, speaking up and stop being on mute. But isn't it important to be more real? We are so afraid of being real and vulnerable and showing maybe that nitty gritty and a little bit darker and maybe a little bit more sad or quote unquote weak side of us, that we are hiding it. And by hiding it, we are telling the world and ourselves, oh, this is not good. We shouldn't feel this way. We shouldn't have it. And then we are going into this cycle of only showing these 5% that feel good, and all the others we are somehow shoving under the rug. What do you feel about realness and speaking up?
I think it depends. I think people have a right to their privacy, so I'm very careful about how I communicate this, because I'm an open book. Clearly, just open my book, and I put myself out there, talk about my vulnerabilities and my struggles and my issues. But I respect that not everyone wants to do that. I think that's important, that people get to preserve their privacy. But I do think that you are a demonstration to the world in everything that you say, everything that you do, everything that you are. And so I don't think people have to put themselves out there in quite the same way that I have, but I do think that people need to be more mindful of how honest and authentic they're being in the way they communicate. And communication could be a conversation as much as it is what you wear, how you do your hair, what you put out, what kind of energy you put out into the world.
Yeah, I agree. But I think privacy is a tricky one, because on some level, we do have a responsibility, especially as we're becoming more aware, to also, like you said, to put ourselves out there, maybe in a more inspirational and also authentic way. And that may mean right now also to show, yes, I'm anxious. Yes, I struggle. Yes, I do have, 4 o'clock in the morning, sometimes these, panic attacks where I'm thinking the world's going to fall apart. And because I think this brings the conversation of how can we change that into the open. I think we have been in hiding. Now, I respect privacy, but we have been in hiding behind this beautiful glitter of how we want to be seen as young and vital and successful too long. And I think there's too much unrealness that our life has become. And I believe it's time to be more open and real in that regard. And that can be in a small circle. Some people aren't real to their family, not even real to their partners. They pretend to them that they have it together or they are different than they are. But in your culture, you said something about you had to be more quiet in general. There was more like women are not supposed to have, a non-mute button. So how do you get out of
general, I think in all cultures, right, women are expected to really be quieter. Right. That's sort of an expectation, right? Be seen and not heard. And it's said about children and applied to women. And so I think there's always that piece of it. I think in Latino culture, there's as you know, I was having this conversation with an Asian woman that I was talking to yesterday, who's a friend, and I had just had this conversation with an African American woman over the weekend, who's also a friend. There's also this piece of oppressed communities, right, of communities that have historically been oppressed, that we are expected to put our best foot forward, right? That we have to prove that we have it together because we've been attacked historically and accused of being less than. And so our image has to be that of somebody who is more than, right? And so there's this danger that comes out of that, because then you are raised to feel like you cannot, quote, put your business in the street, right? Or you cannot really be too authentic, because you open yourself up to criticism and judgment, and you will validate the concerns of other people and what they say about you as a stereotype, or as a person who's not as great, or as much, or as whatever, right? And so there's a protectiveness that can breed secrecy, or it can breed silence, or it can breed almost like an incubation, if
Right.
you will, right? And so a piece of evolving is also having the confidence and courage to say, I'm strong and I struggle, right? Again, that balance. And being able to sit in that and have the courage to do that. And I'm aware that I benefit from the millions of women of color who have come before me to set a stage where I can come up here and be like, yeah, I got some issues. And nobody takes that as a generalization about my competence as a woman of color, right? But it's taken a long time to build that platform. And I think there's still remnants of that protectiveness that people feel they need to have. And I understand where it came from, but it doesn't always serve us.
Hmm. And is there a specific way where people can start unmuting themselves? Would you
Yeah.
suggest to do this with friends first, or how would you say the mute button can be lifted?
Again, I think that expressive writing and that journaling is really important, because I do realize that so many people don't even know what they're thinking.
Right.
That a big piece of taking yourself off mute is being able to listen to yourself, because you haven't heard your own voice in how many years, over the voices of all of the people telling you who you should be, who you aren't, what you need to do, what you don't need to do, what you like, what you don't like, all these other things. So a piece of that is really just learning to start to hear your own voice. Meditation is incredible for that, right? To really be able to sit in silence and see what comes up and not judge it, just observe it. And if you can shift it, shift it. And if you can't shift it, sit in it. But really taking the time to spend inside of your mind and inside of your heart, I think it's important. For me, the second step, once you've been able to do that, is to really have those honest conversations with your partner. And everybody has a partner. Even if you're single, you have someone that is your intimate partner, right? It could be your sister, it could be your best friend, it could be your child, but there's someone in your life that you share the most energy and time with. And I would say start being honest with that person. There's so much stuff we don't tell each other.
Hmm.
So much that when I got into my mid-30s and started to have honest conversations with my mother, I couldn't believe the amount of things we didn't tell each other. And it wasn't because we were deliberately lying. It was because certain conversations had never come up, right? Like, Mama, maybe I don't need to eat rice every night. Like, maybe that's not helping any of us, right? Those kinds of things. We don't have the most basic honest conversations with one another, because we haven't created the space and the freedom and the room and the openness for it. So I think first, really being able to hear yourself in some processes that facilitate that, journaling, meditation, that sort of thing, and then really having honest, open conversations with other people that can start with just, hey, I think I need to talk about some stuff in my mind, and can you just listen? That's an appropriate way to start the conversation.
Absolutely. Now, we are almost out of time, but I have two pressing questions that I want you to quickly.
Okay, no pressure. Go.
They are very little question. One is, do we have to love ourselves before we find love?
I don't think we have to love ourselves before we find love, but I think you're going to find a better love if you do. Because I think people learn how to love us by watching us love us. And I will often see women who are 30 years into a relationship and their husband doesn't pay them any attention, and the kid comes in on the device and barely looks at her. And, she goes to work and she's not getting the respect or the validation or the promotion or whatever. And the question that she'll ask me is, why am I invisible to all of these people? And I'm like, well, when's the last time you saw yourself?
Right.
because they're all taking a cue about how to love you and how to treat you from how they see you love you and treat you. So what have you taught them about what you expect, what you require, what you're requesting, what you'll reciprocate, what you're willing to do, what you're not willing to do, what you'll allow, what you'll tolerate, what you'll contribute? What have you taught them about those things? And how is that showing up for you?
The invisible pleaser, for sure. But then, of course, there is also when you don't love yourself, while you are in a relationship, then there comes this dependency often, where you do bend into the shape of whoever you're with just to get some approval. So these are the extreme downfalls of this. So as we talked about at the beginning, it's never too late to start loving yourself. Now, the second question is for those that are alone during the holidays and that actually have a really hard time being alone. They hate their presence. What would you suggest for them to do in order to make this not a depressing and sad event, but really something that is more like a reason to, celebrate yourself?
Yeah. So I would say balance it. I don't suggest that people stay alone the entire season, because I do think that it triggers up some stuff that you have to work through in a more long-term and up and down kind of balanced way, right? So I would say just balance the time you spend by yourself. You can decorate your apartment and you can make yourself some hot cocoa, and you can wake up on a morning and watch, Hallmark television and drink your hot cocoa and spend some time with yourself and journal and write, and maybe write letters to people in your life who have been good to you that you want to mail out. You can do that kind of stuff and spend some time alone. But then I would also say find some supportive circles to be around, right? Because it's a time where we do want to feel connected, and to ignore that would be irresponsible of me, right? So I think find some supportive circles. It can be anything. I dance with strangers in Macy's for no reason, just because the music is good, and my fiance will be like, oh, here she goes, right? So find ways to connect with other people. Supportive circles can be friends or family that you can reach out to, but it can also just be volunteering at a place where you connect with other people who are interested in doing good. It can be going to a Starbucks or to a Barnes and Noble and really just sitting in the cafe area and asking people for a napkin or for some tips on something, or can they recommend a book? You'd be surprised how many other people want to talk to you. So find ways to balance spending time alone with connecting with others.
But ultimately, no, also, and I find this because I had spent quite some time alone, that it's really important to use this alone time to be kind to yourself, not just to sit there and brace yourself, hoping it's going to be over, but really noticing ultimately when you really reach that point where we talked about a self-acceptance and self-love, you never feel alone. Somehow you always, I have the best conversations with myself because I never disagree. It's perfect. But that's something that you just want to use this holiday season also as an opportunity to really befriend yourself. You don't have to love yourself right away, but you may start liking yourself more. And that's
a lot.
A huge gift.
Yeah. In my book, I talk about the 8 dimensions of wellness, and you can just find one activity to be kind to yourself in each of them, right? Emotional, just sit and journal. Financial, buy yourself a nice gift. Social, go out and volunteer. Spiritual, sit in meditation, right? So there are ways to just spend the week really being good to yourself in each one of those dimensions. So take the time to, as you said, be kind to yourself. It's a great season to do that.
Well, time is always flying when we have fun. So again, it's almost over now. Dr. D, I gotta get a cut here. How can people learn more about you?
Okay, so go to my website. That's www.dinoranieves.com. That's DINORAHNIEVES. www.dinoranieves.com.
And there is also a link on the description of the show, so you can always reach that. Thank you so much for being on the show. It was fantastic.
Thank you so much for having me. I loved it. I had a good time.
Lovely, great information, lovely presents, and I wish you happy holiday. And
thank you. Happy holidays to you and yours.
and much success for the future. This was it for Empowerment Radio. We will be back in the new year. Thank you so much for tuning in 2018 again. And I wish you and your loved ones happy holidays and a blessed 2019. Goodbye.